Next up on the international schedule, we have Angela Lamarca, sometime of the Christie Hospital, but now in the Fundación Jiménez Díaz University Hospital in Madrid, who's going to tell us about the landscape of cholangiocarcinoma treatment, diagnosis in Spain. Thank you very much, Angela.
Thank you very much, John and Lorenza, and to the AMMF for the invitation. And well, I was asked to talk about the situation of cholangiocarcinoma in Spain. But to be honest, I also wanted to say that I have a very clear image of Narong in this conference where I met him, and that we are not really going to forget him. So my condolences to all the family and the colleagues. So we are going to change from geographical space and we are moving to Europe. So as John was saying, I was at the Christie in Manchester for 10 years and I moved back to Spain, which is my hometown and my home country, 10 years ago. These are my disclosures. And the aim of this lecture is really to point the positive things, but especially the challenges that we are facing in other countries. Some of them are very similar to what we have in the UK, but definitely very, very different to what is happening in other areas across the world. So to start with some positives, I only have this slide of positives. Everything else is about the challenges. But it's true that, for example, my experience on diagnosis of cancer in general, but also cholangiocarcinoma and pancreas, is that the diagnosis is probably faster in Spain to what I have experienced in the UK. This is a personal experience. We have a large population of patients, and therefore we have quite a significant number of patients with cholangiocarcinoma, and we are known for being very good recruiters for clinical trials. We have very active clinicians for academic research and associations. So that's really something very important in Spain. But we have a lot of challenges, and the rest of my lecture is going to be about all these challenges that we are facing and how can we learn from other countries and how can we probably all together face some of them. So some of them are related to the incidence and the registries that we have, how good and how bad they are, challenges for diagnosis and MDTs, patient associations, access to molecular profiling, which we have been talking about for a long time today, and also, of course, access to new treatment options. I will go one by one, and this is kind of the agenda that we are going to follow. Starting by the incidence and the registries, well, here we are, Spain. We have a relatively significant incidence of cholangiocarcinoma, even though it's considered a rare tumor. But we are diagnosing more and more, and the incidence is increasing across the world, including Spain also. It's true that we don't really have centers of excellence as it happens in other countries, so patients are seen in whatever hospital they are allocated to depending on where they live, which is one of the challenges. Regarding the incidence or whatever data we have from a registry point of view, similar to what happens in the UK, we have the national registry, but the information in those registry, as you well know, is not very reliable, especially for heterogeneous malignancies like biliary tract tumors, and sometimes really differentiating liver cancer from cholangiocarcinoma is a very difficult task. Because of this, the TTD, which is one of these collaborative groups in Spain, very strong and who have been doing a fantastic job, they set up this registry, which is called the RETUT registry. It has limitations, and the first one is that it's an oncology registry, which means that the healthcare professionals that are really including patients in the registry are mainly oncologists, and therefore there is a huge selection bias on the patients that are represented here. But it's very good to see that they are already starting to publish their data. And these were the first results that they presented last year, total of 778 evaluable patients across 19 sites, and they are increasing in this registry. This was the first data cutoff, but definitely nice to see that these things are starting to be developed, especially for cholangiocarcinoma, specifically for cholangiocarcinoma. It's not a general registry, it's exclusively for cholangiocarcinoma, which is one of the strengths. For diagnosis and MDT, again, this is a huge problem. This was some work that we did within the ENSCA, and we came up with some recommendations for MDTs in cholangiocarcinoma, because it's true that we didn't really know how an MDT in cholangiocarcinoma should look like. So after doing a survey across multiple countries, we came up with some recommendations and some specialists that ideally should be represented. At the time of me being involved in this work, I was based here in the UK, and a lot of these items were things that were quite feasible in this country. So, for example, differences that I can see between the UK and Spain. In the UK, everyone knows or everyone accepts that every patient with a diagnosis of cancer has to be diagnosed in a multidisciplinary discussion team. This doesn't really happen in Spain. It's much more based on who is the treating oncologist and whether they take that patient to the MDT or not. So that is one of the challenges that we are having. It's not something so official. As you can see in these recommendations, there are a lot of different specialists that are recognized, and some of the recommendations were especially about having, for example, an MDT coordinator, someone who is really collecting all the patients that are going to be discussed, take that list to the radiologist so they can prepare the meeting in advance. Things that you may think that they are very obvious, but that they do need resources, and that not all those resources are available in all those countries. And something else that I wanted to point out, something that I learned also in the UK, is the role of the CNS. When I came to the UK and they introduced me to the CNS, we ended up being very close friends. But when she was describing to me the work that she was doing, I said, "You do not exist in Spain." And that's true. CNS, the role of the CNS, which is paramount, which has a huge impact, positive impact in patients' experience during the treatment of cancer, is not something that is available in Spain. Nurses in Spain don't really have the opportunity of having that type of specialization, and I think it's something that we really need to develop further. As you can see, cancer of unknown primary is coming up, and it's the third time today that we mentioned this, but it's a very important thing as well, and I think we have to be more and more present in all the MDTs, not only in the HPV MDTs, but also, for example, cancer of unknown primary, and linking with other specialists within oncology, so we make sure that patients with intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma are not misdiagnosed. So related to this, we do need infrastructure. We do have some infrastructure, but it's not as official and it's not as well resourced as it may be in other countries, especially for coordinators and for CNSs, which I do believe that is paramount for patients' experience, and protected time probably for that MDT as well, because otherwise it may be a little bit challenging to really be attending on the MDT while you are also answering a phone call, for example. Patient associations. This is a very challenging topic, and again, something that I learned from my experience in the UK, from Helen and the AMMF, is that there is a huge benefit for our patients for having a patient association, not only for information, but also for feeling that they are not alone with a rare cancer that no one heard about, which is happening a lot to patients with cholangiocarcinoma. A lot of associations across the world. I have been working with AMMF, also with the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation, and I have been in touch also with the Italian one, but in Spain we do not have a patient association for cholangiocarcinoma. There is work in progress, and we have actually set up a potential first meeting in October with a few patients that we are aiming to invite and really start developing something where maybe they can see what is happening with other associations and maybe develop something to do some work in Spain for Spanish patients. I really think that this is one of the huge challenges we have. Molecular profiling, I'm going to go very quickly because we have already seen this, but we know from the current guidelines that molecular profiling should be performed for patients with cholangiocarcinoma. All patients with cholangiocarcinoma should have molecular profiling performed, covering for a multiple number of genes, and this is very, very clear. We do not really need to send that message anymore. But what is true is that we don't always have a biopsy. We sometimes need a ctDNA, and we also now have ESMO recommendations with cholangiocarcinoma as one of the indications for ctDNA for molecular profiling. profiling. We know that we need to test the patients we need to perform a molecular profiling early when the patient is diagnosed with advanced disease, at the same time of starting treatment within the palliative setting, and that this should be a wide panel of genes. And the problem we have with molecular profiling in Spain is that it's not still funded for cholangiocarcinoma, and this is linked also to the access to treatments that I will show you later. We may be able to test for an FGFR2 fusion in one specific institution or in institutions in general, but a wide gene panel is not really something that is still funded within the healthcare. So the access that we have has been one from TTD, again, is the collaborative group. They did huge work with pharma, and they set up these testing hubs. And it's a brilliant idea, because what they did was, okay, we will have this funding from pharma. We may not have the funding from our government, but we found our own funding for doing molecular profiling, wide panel of genes for patients with cholangiocarcinoma, 4 sites across Spain where patients can be sent for testing. So that's fantastic. And outside this, or whenever this finishes, what we have is access across clinical trials. So what I do always is to look into which options of molecular profiling we have in my institution within whatever clinical trials we have, and try to have the molecular profiling in that area. So molecular profiling definitely improving, but still not there for doing really the panel that we would like to do for all patients. And now we go to the very, very challenging point, which is also the access to new treatments. So I was previously mentioning that we recruit a lot into clinical trials, or that my colleagues in Spain have been recruiting a lot into clinical trials for the last 10 years while I was here. And they have been represented in a lot of the practice-changing clinical trials. So it's very frustrating that once the trial finishes, you cannot really offer that treatment to your patients. The ESMO guidelines have recommendations for immunotherapy, and also recommendations for targeted therapy. So let me tell you a little bit which is the situation for these two. Immunotherapy, we know we have the TOPAZ clinical trials. We already heard that, and this is now FDA and EMA approved. And we also have the very recent positive data for overall survival from the Keynote 966 study, which maybe, hopefully, will be approved at some point. But for now, we have durvalumab approved. We also have the targeted therapies with IDH, FDA, and EMA approved for ivosidenib very recently. And we have FGFR inhibitors for cholangiocarcinoma, with 3 of them approved by the FDA, 2 of them also by EMA, with futibatinib waiting for final decision, but very likely to be approved by EMA. And we heard previously the 3 clinical trials in the first-line setting that were recruiting, 2 of them close to recruitment. So we only have 1 clinical trial, pemigatinib, open in the first-line setting, and another clinical trial in the second-line setting with an FGFR inhibitor, which is the Relay. Those are the options of trials for patients with FGFR2 fusion. Why am I saying this? I am saying this because, unfortunately, in Spain, we do not have access to pemigatinib at this point. Even though it's approved by the EMA, there is no price agreed by the government, so we cannot really access pemigatinib in Spain, which is really hard for me to say. I have heard for many years how tough NICE was, and when I left the UK, we could use pemigatinib in the UK, and unfortunately, we could not access that in Spain. So very challenging and a huge problem. That's why we rely fully on clinical trials. This is not only a problem in Spain. I think each country in Europe has its own limitations, and this is something we learned from the ARCAGEN project. This was a European project where we were performing molecular profiling. I was actually in the UK when I was participating here. And what we learned was that a very, very small proportion of patients were really having a different treatment or a targeted treatment based on those molecular profiling results. So this access to the matched treatment is still an issue and is something that I think we need to improve. It's not only about delivering in clinical trials, but also how can we make that a reality for our patients in clinical practice. These were the take-home messages from this ARCAGEN study, and one of them was the access to the matched targeted therapies being an ongoing issue, and how we need to really work together with the stakeholders as well. Regarding the access to novel therapies, I explained to you about the pemigatinib. Okay, so the durvalumab, for example, is very challenging as well because it has been approved, but again, we still don't have a price. Some institutions may be able to use it, but it's not something homogeneous across the country. So again, we are having a huge heterogeneity between different areas in Spain, depending where you live. You may have access to durvalumab or not, and within the same institution, some patients may have it or not. And I really think that that's not right, and that we should really be able to provide this more homogeneously for all patients who may derive a benefit. There is something also special for Spain, and is the fact that because durvalumab, for example, has an approved indication for, that has approval for another indication, which in this case is lung cancer, we cannot access this via an early access or a compassionate use. They are bureaucracy issues, but this is how it is. So very challenging, and this is why I think even though some of the challenges are common to countries, the solutions may be different. Access to treatment is challenging for a lot of countries, but the solution that may work for Spain may not work for Italy or for the UK. We have seen molecular profiling changing, and we have seen this slide previously, how much we are learning. So really not being able to deliver on all these treatments is quite frustrating. So this is my conclusion slides. Please remember also that I started saying how wonderful we are in Spain, but these are the challenges, and I think we are here to talk about the challenges and to try and find solutions. So we are working on the registries, and I have to say congratulations to the TTD because they did a great work on the RETUTE study, also on the molecular profiling access. The access to new treatment options remains very challenging diagnosis and DMDTs. The role of the CNS is non-existent. We need better funded or better resourced MDTs, and definitely patient associations, and Helen knows that. I will be in touch with her for moving that forward. And that's everything. Thank you all very much for your attention. I really wanted to say that I love these conferences because we really need to work together. This is not a problem for healthcare professionals or for patients. We really need to work together one day at a time, and we will get there. Thank you.